Welcome to Wednesday Night Live. Tonight we want to have fun and grow closer together as families and a church community. So buckle up, let's dive into this week's video together.
Tonight's lesson, Noah's Ark.
Hello, Pomona Christian Church. I'm Veronica.
I'm Taylor.
And we're here to tell you that every Wednesday night we're going to be going to a different location in Howell County to have a watch party with your family.
For our Wednesday night live, and each week we will be interviewing you at those watch parties for questions for the next week's lesson time. And this week we get to interview Blake in Mountain View.
Woohoo, Blake! We're coming for you. Make sure to come back each week
for our new adventure.
I've got my son Alex and Blake right here, and we're going to interview Blake about some questions he may have for Marcus about the story of Noah. So Blake, I know you've listened to it. What are some of the questions you have for Marcus?
So when I heard the story, I heard that there's 3 different floors. Like what were the different floors used for, and what made an animal clean and non-clean, and what did they do with the ark after the water dried up?
That is so good. So what were those again? The first one is?
What did they use the 3 floors for?
Okay.
And what made it clean? What considered an animal clean or non-clean?
Uh-huh.
And what did they do with the ark after all the water dried up?
Those are some excellent questions. Alex, you have any questions?
No.
All right. Marcus, it's back to you.
I've been doing some research, Blake, and I will get back to you in just a minute. Thank you.
Well, hey everyone, I just wanted to come with you tonight and tell you a few jokes because I don't know if you've noticed this before, but the story of Noah's Ark is hilarious. For instance, have you ever thought about where Noah kept the bees? Probably not. I heard though, he kept them in the ark hives. Get it? All right. Next up, where did he keep all of the penguins at? Again, who knows? But I heard he kept them in the Arctic section. All right, great. Next, do you know who the most successful investor in the Bible was? You guessed it, it was Noah, because he floated his stocks while everything else was in liquidation. All right. And then, if you've ever thought about this, it makes a lot of sense, but what was the one bird that Noah regretted putting on the ark? It had to be the woodpecker. Can you imagine pecking on that ark all the time? And also, what did Noah and his sons do for fun on the ark? I imagine that they went fishing every now and then. But I did hear that Noah had to warn his sons whenever they went fishing. He had to say, guys, listen, you better get this right because I've only got 2 worms. And finally, you know, if any of you ever need to build an ark, please just give me a call because I know a guy. All right, everyone, thanks and have a great night.
Hey everybody, glad to have you tonight, and it's exciting to be able to do this as a church family online. And one thing we are looking at tonight is
Noah's flood.
what that means. And the flood of Noah is a story of redemption. It's probably the most familiar story in the scriptures to many people. I remember my son's room was decorated with artwork from the flood and Noah and the animals when he was younger. And so it's a very powerful story. And I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 6. And it talks about why God sent the flood. And it said, "The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was evil, only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals, and creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." So I'm going to encourage you as a family to pick up there and look at the account of Noah and the flood for yourselves in Genesis chapter 6, and you can pick that up in verse 9. But ultimately it tells us a story of how wicked mankind had become. That wickedness is the natural tendency, that we just kind of run a downhill slope when it comes to morality and God's law, that we do what we want. And it said God was grieved that he saw man in that state where all they thought about were evil things. It also says it was a violent place. And so it was no good except for Noah and his family. And so ultimately, it's a story of redemption, of God making something good that was once bad. And that's what God is doing throughout all of Scripture. In fact, that's what He's done for us through Jesus Christ. And so I want us to think about water. You know, that's what God used to cleanse the earth, to give a new start to mankind, to give a new start to humanity, and continue His plan of redemption that would lead to Jesus Christ. And when you think about water, we love water. We love to play in it. We like to swim in it. But water is essential to our life. So water is essential to life. You know, it's one of the things we have to have. We need air, we need water, we need food, we need shelter. It's one of those essential things. But too much water, and we can drown. Too much water, it brings us to another understanding. The water is powerful. Just a few years ago, we had a flood. And compared to the flood of Noah, it was really small. It wasn't very powerful, but we saw the damage just that kind of flood can cause. You can see the Grand Canyon and the things that are formed out of water. But water is powerful. Another thing about water is its cleansing. You know, it makes things new again. And so water is a very unique thing. Of all the elements on the earth, you know, water floats when it's in its solid form. There's some very unique things that are unique to water that make it a thing that gives us life. That if you were to change one thing about water, life on earth wouldn't even be possible. So God uses water to cleanse the earth through the flood because it's powerful and because it's cleansing. But that was also essential for us because it was part of God's plan to bring us back to Him. And so I'm going to read from 1 Peter chapter 3. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, it shows what the flood represents today. You know, you can look at a lot of the events and the things that God has done in the Old Testament and see not only were they great acts that He did on behalf of the Israelites that were all part of His plan to bring about Jesus, but they also represent something in the New Testament, that there was a fulfillment, that they prophesied something. And it says this in 1 Peter chapter 3, where he compares the water of the flood to baptism. And it says this, "For Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive through the Spirit." So it's telling us there that instead of the judgment of a flood, that God promised He would never flood the earth again, that someone else would take our punishment for us. That a righteous person would die. The only person who was ever perfect, and that was Jesus, would die for us. And he would die in our place. And then it talks about the ark and the waters of the flood. And it says this about Noah and the ark. It says, in it, talking about the ark, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a good conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to Him. So he shows that just as the water cleansed the earth, that baptism represents that cleansing that God gives us through Jesus Christ. Because water is powerful, but water is also cleansing. And just as God cleansed the earth, and cleansed the earth to make it new again, and the word in the Bible for that is to redeem, to make valuable again, He redeemed us through Jesus Christ, dying in our place. That's why He said He would never flood the earth again, because His plan was to bring Jesus to die for us so that we wouldn't have to face judgment. And so as we think about water and its cleansing power and the power that it has, let's be thankful to God that He would send His Son to die for us. And we encourage you, if you have never taken that step to be baptized, that that's part of God's plan of redemption when we believe in Him and trust in Him. And so we're going to have a time where you can pause this video and you can discuss as a family some questions that we're going to have, and then you can continue, and then I will answer some of Blake's very important questions. Okay, Blake, here are the answers to your questions, and I think they're very good questions, very insightful, show you're very familiar with the text and the account of Noah, the ark, and the flood. So here's the first question. What happened to the ark? Well, it says in Scripture that the ark settled on Mount Ararat. And so somewhere in that area, it's northern Turkey, quite a bit of ways away, but of course they were on the ark for a while. It would have drifted, and it said it settled on that mountain. Now we don't know how high on the mountain that it settled, but once the ark was there and landed and everybody left, I assume that Noah and his family and the animals left and the ark was just left there. What happened to it, we don't know. There have been a lot of claims through history or other people that are trying to research it today that claim they have found it. Those have kind of been disputed. So we really don't know what happened. But being made of wood and being in the elements and that long ago, you know, if it was left and people didn't take it apart to use for supplies, which I think probably would have happened eventually, it probably just would have decayed. But that's a great question, and the truth is we don't know. And I think the big thing when we have these questions, if we just go by Scripture, it really doesn't say what happened, but we do know that it rested there, and we really don't know much more after that. The second question, why were there 3 decks inside the ark? And that's a very good one. Again, Scripture doesn't give us a specific reason, but we assume Noah knew, since he was given the plans by God, what those were for. And I've seen some different things. I had to dig into this one a little bit, but it seems like probably the bottom part was used for some waste, you know, or manure from the animals. You know, that's probably the stuff they'd want to keep on the bottom. And so maybe part of the bottom level was used for that. And maybe some of the bigger, you know, animals that they didn't want to take up the ramps, they just want to left there and leave there and needed some room. Maybe the giraffes were on the bottom. They needed some headroom. And I saw one thing said that mammals and people were on the second level and that birds on the top level, but I think, boy, if I'm Noah and his family, I'm going to be on the top level. So those are guesses. Scripture just says that they were to have 3 decks inside the ark, 3 floors, and I assume that they understood what that would be for and why. The last question was clean and unclean animals. And at that time, Some have speculated that if Noah didn't know that God sent them, the clean animals came 7 of a kind, and so that they would have shown up, they would have just known which were clean. We know later in Scripture what the clean animals and the unclean. And as far as mammals, the clean animals are the ones that chew the cud and have a split hoof. And so those were the clean animals. So you've got cattle, you've got sheep, you've got goats, you've got those things as far as the mammals that can be eaten. And so those came 7 of a kind, and maybe that's, they would eat 1 or 2 of those, or, so many for their own food during their time on the ark. And so that was the difference. If an animal had a solid hoof and chewed the cud, you couldn't eat it. If it had a split hoof or a paw, or a split hoof but didn't chew the cud, you couldn't eat it. If it had a paw like a rabbit, you couldn't eat a rabbit. So those were the differences in the clean and the unclean animals. And unfortunately, they couldn't enjoy bacon and breakfast sausage. So there were 7 of every kind of clean animal, 2 of every kind of unclean animal. And you can do some research on your own. There are fish. There were clean and unclean fish, but I assume they were safe in the water, as you have fish had to have scales were one thing to be clean. Fish without scales, they couldn't eat. And then there are even rules on what kind of insects were clean and were unclean. So I encourage you to check those things out as well. And God revealed those to the Israelites later through the law of Moses. But good questions, Blake, and appreciate everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's video. Each Wednesday this fall, we plan on having fun and an opportunity to grow together as families and a church community. We cannot wait to see you and your friends and your family back right here at the same time next week. We'll see you all soon.